All right, so today we are installing the brake lines on my Bearhawk Companion. Now, I have already done the wheels and brakes like I mentioned in the last video, but what I haven't discussed and has been in several videos is the rudders connections, the actual rudder pedals and brakes themselves, and the brake lines going to the calipers out at the main gear. So let's take a look at those right now. This was back in January when I began to unpack these rudder pedals, and it took some time to get everything organized and get all my hardware in. I began by assembling the actual brake pedals to the rudder pedal assembly itself. It all comes as one unit, and it's very easy to go ahead and remove the paint from these by deburring and using a reaming tool, and you will need to do that. This is a two-part, kind of like an epoxy primer that goes on this frame for corrosion protection, and it does take a good amount of deburring to get all the paint out to where the hardware will fit. Once I'd done that, I assembled this up down at the hanger. Because these are rotating parts, they must be installed with a castle nut and some kind of securing hardware, in this case a cotter pin. Now, the appropriate way for securing a cotter pin is to fold the long tail over the top and then to fold the short tail down towards the bottom. This will prevent anyone from hanging their hand on that if they inadvertently run their hand over it, and it is technically the correct way per AC 4313 and the build manuals on how to do cotter pin hardware. Up next, I began to unpack the brake master cylinders, and there's really good instructions the kit will send you. These are the Matco brake cylinders, and that's pretty standard for the Bearhawks. That's what they send with their kit, what they provide. But to prevent an issue, you have to put this blocking mechanism or a travel restrictor onto the brakes. It was so cold at the hangar that I decided to just head back to the house and do this at home with the kids. The more we do this project together as a family, the more I hope it is just a special memory for our kids as we have adventures in this aircraft years from now. But every chance that I can, I've been doing stuff with them and trying to just gently coach on what hardware is and how things work. And it's been a really fun process to get to have all of them work with me on this build so far. In our next video, we're gonna get Mama involved a little bit as her expertise comes into play in what we're doing right after we get done with these rudder pedals. I bundled back up, this time in a little bit warmer clothing, and then headed back down to the hangar to get started installing these on the actual aircraft itself. Now, the master cylinders are a valve that compresses and pushes fluid from the top to the bottom down to the brake calipers themselves. There will be a little reservoir that I install on the top side, but here I just have assembled all of the cylinders, and then now I am installing them on the aircraft. You'll either need a second set of hands or a clamp to do this. These master cylinders have tabs welded straight onto the frame, and all you have to do is put the hardware through and attach them to that frame itself. It's very self-explanatory. Up next, it's time to drill holes for the hardware to attach the rudder pedals to the frames themselves. Double and triple check that you've got this square, that you've not got it twisted or any restriction in the travel there, and then mark. And the way I did this is I drilled one hole on each side, and then I used a cleco to hold it in place while I went around and drilled the hole on the opposite side. Then I upsized everything with a step bit and ran the appropriate -3 hardware through to hold it in place. Now, the floorboards will not go under this. The floorboards will stop short of this. So I'm pretty sure I'm gonna put some kind of a valance over this to sort of prevent stuff from sliding down into the belly of the aircraft and getting lost forever. But I don't exactly know how I'm going to do that just yet. But here they are installed, and this component is basically finished.
Next, I laid out all the hardware that I would need to install the brake lines to run from these cylinders out to the brake calipers at the wheels themselves. Now, the Bearhawk kit recommends and sends a reservoir that you mount on either side of the firewall. I actually think they recommend it through the firewall. I personally don't like that. It adds cutting through the firewall an additional time. So I mounted these reservoir tanks that I got from Aircraft Spruce right at the brake valves themselves. Next, I drilled through the gear to install the bulkhead 90 that will turn the brake lines down into the main gear themselves and then run it down towards the calipers. This was a AN fitting and pretty straightforward. Just drilled a hole through and then ran the bulkhead hardware through to hold it in place. The brake lines on the Bearhawk are made out of 1/4 inch rigid tubing. Well, the parts that are rigid are. So I have a piece of that ran from that bulkhead fitting and then down the gear leg. And originally I was using the Flightlines from Aircraft Specialty Flightlines, which I'll speak more on later, to run a short leg at the very bottom of the gear. But I kind of didn't like how that ended up looking, so I ended up using a different method that I'll share with you momentarily. While I was at Oshkosh last week, I ended up picking up some extra union hardware that I had struggled to find that was 2 male fittings as a union. That would allow me to connect the hardware here at the base of the gear. And I don't particularly like how this setup, which is exactly how it's supposed to be, is designed. So I've elected to change this and I've modified it by cutting off that tube a little bit higher and actually routing the flexible brake line through the fabric up into the gear itself, at which point it will be mounted with an Adele clamp at the base of the gear, and then my connection will be higher in the gear leg, so it's not just wedged down in there at the very bottom. Because I'm also electing to not install a parking brake, I was able to run just flexible lines from the brake pedals themselves all the way out to this bulkhead union. And there's a pretty important reason why I have decided not to do that.
I have in my hands here the parking brake for the Bearhawk, and I want to remove this and kind of explain it. I'm sure there will be people out there that think that this is the dumbest thing that I could do for my build, but this is just kind of me personally. I want to explain what this is and how it works, and then we'll go from there. This is the Matco parking brake. This is a mechanically actuated, you pull the lever on the dash, and it's going to move this arm to seal a valve. The problem with that is these can fail, and by fail I mean they can basically work their way to where the valve is either partially closed or somewhat closed. Now, I don't 100% know that this is the case, but recently a fairly high profile Bearhawk, and I say recently and nobody's going to remember who it is or what it is, but in the last 6 months in Louisiana, a fairly high profile Bearhawk was incapacitated on a ramp because a parking brake locked up on them. They didn't really clarify kind of what happened or how it happened, but I guarantee you it stems back to this parking valve. I am making the decision to not install this on the aircraft, which means that anywhere that I fly, I'll have to either have a pair of chocks with me, which I carry anyway, so it's not that big of a deal, or I'll just have to tie the aircraft down. And if it's overnight, I'm doing that anyways. I don't trust, the parking brake. I've had them fail on me. I've had them lock up on me. So that's probably where a little bit of that's coming from. But even though I have it because it came with a kit, I am not installing the parking brake that is associated with the Bearhawk Companion. That's just what I'm doing. It simplifies this whole process. I don't have to mount this on that bulkhead where everything passes through. I won't have to mount that there, nor will I have to put the fittings in that then route to the gear themselves. It's just going to be simpler. It's going to be a lighter weight, by 1/4 pound. But that's why I'm not doing it. So I am not installing this brake system on the Bearhawk, only the brake lines themselves, but no parking brake. So all of that components that I've got in my kit, I'm not using.
One additional benefit that as a mechanic I think of quite often is having no parking brake actually simplifies the process of bleeding these and servicing these lines. It simply will be a line routed straight from the calipers up to the reservoir as you follow the lines and head up to the system. And we'll take an overview of what this whole system looks like at the end of this video. Here I'm just finishing by wrapping up the rigid tubing that will attach from the bulkhead union down to where the flexible union will join. I run this through and give it a 90. You need at least a joggle or a 90 in every rigid tubing just because of the natural thermal expansion and retraction of the airframe itself. It doesn't matter how long or short your tubing is, you really need to make sure that you've got that built in just to deal with the expansion of the steel aircraft versus the aluminum tubing. So here I've got it turned down, and I made the decision because I was not doing the reservoir nor was I doing the parking brake. I had a couple flight lines left over, and so here I have a longer flight line that was dedicated to go from the reservoir to the top of the pilot's cylinders, and I am running it up, and it'll just be a longer flexible line. It'll Adele clamp at the bottom. I end up doing this on the left side as well.
So I still need to get a clamp for right here, but now this will just go straight inside the fabric that's going to wrap around these gears. That will run up, and this is, yes, it's flexible, but it'll be basically rigid right there, and any vibration that this does is going to be minimal compared to what I did have on this side, hooking up these really short runs and trying to connect them. I'm actually going to do the exact same thing on this side I did on the other side. I'm going to use a long run from here up, and then I'm going to cut and put that piece of hardware up there. So hopefully that works. Now I do want to say that these flight lines, these brake lines that you are seeing me install on the Bearhawk, these are from Aircraft Specialty Flight Lines, and they are sponsoring this build. Special thanks to Steve over there by sending me the Bearhawk kit for this. They have one worked up. You can order this through Virgil over at Bearhawk. They have everything labeled and numbered here for literally like a Bearhawk part number. This is in the inventory list as far as what they recommend, and they get you from the reservoir, if you use the Matco system, all the way down to the caliper, every flight line that you need, and then the rigid tubing in between. But by buying these, you will save probably 20 or 30 hours of manufacturing on your flexible tubing, if that's the route you're going to go, and you'll be able to have, you know, just a more professional quality. These are really, really good quality tubing. This is the 3/16 inch flight line. These come in multiple colors. Unfortunately, I didn't know that when I got these. I think blue would have looked sick with the paint scheme that I've got coming down the pike. But this is just their black flexible line right here. And these are some really awesome flight lines. I'm super excited to be installing them on the aircraft. And this is not all that this company does, so make sure you go check them out at aircraftspecialty.com. And thanks specifically to them for sponsoring this build. I need some grommets, so I've got to get a grommet for this where it passes through this bulkhead right here, as well as I need some Adele clamps that will fit these flexible flight lines. So once I have those installed, I'll also have to Adele them to the bulkhead so it's somewhat fixed. I think we're done. Now, there is some other stuff that's going to happen probably in one of the next videos. When the tail surfaces get installed, I have to physically set the rudder distance from the firewall here. I've already got the spring installed here for that, but I will have to, if I don't kill myself walking back here, I will have to actually set these a certain distance. So we'll discuss that in a upcoming video, but that should have me settled right here. I've got all of these lines finally installed. Had to use that union that I picked up at Oshkosh recently, and yeah, I'm very happy with where I am on these. And on the next video, we will be discussing the first cosmetic thing that I have really done on the aircraft. Up till now, all I've been doing is kind of structural stuff. So I'm super excited about the artistic skill that's going to be involved in this next video, and I cannot wait to share it with you. It's coming out pretty quick after this one, so stick around. I'll see you then. Have a good one.